Welcome back, everybody. The next presenter will be online, Patrick Dunlop from Curtin University. Patrick will be presenting on the future workforce.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this presentation, whether it be online or face-to-face. I want to talk to you today about our workforce, a project we're calling Workforce 2030, which is a utilisation project stemming from a project that I've been working on with Dr. Blythe McLennan, funded by the Bushfire Natural Hazards CRC on enabling sustainable emergency volunteers. This particular utilisation project is also being supported by our project coordinator, Jane Chong. There's actually a larger team that's backing this, so I'll introduce you to them in a moment. The goal of this project is really to provide, I guess, a user-friendly overview of the research foundation for future workforce planning and strategy developments within the emergency service organisations. So I can translate that a little bit by saying, we know things are changing rapidly on many fronts, and I'll get into some of those in a moment. What are the implications of these changes for emergency response and emergency management organisations across the country? So we've got quite a large team of people involved with this project. You'll notice many of them, they're from 3 different universities. We've got involvement from RMIT, University of Western Australia, and from Curtin University at the Future of Work Institute. And the reason we've assembled such a big team together is because we're really keen to really speak to all stages of an employee's journey, right from attraction, recruitment, all the way through to succession planning. And to do that, we really needed to put together quite a diverse pool of experts. And so we believe we've got many of our bases covered. Just to give you a bit more insight into who we are as a collective, the Future Work Institute's goal is really to promote productive and meaningful work as an essential foundation for a healthy economy and society. So what we really do is we focus on how people contribute and benefit from new knowledge and practices in this changing environment. Ultimately, what we hope to achieve, not just in this project, but just generally speaking, is to understand how to support thriving people and organisations in the digital age. So for most of us, our backgrounds are in organisational psychology, and organisational psychologists are, our job is to understand what drives people and put that into a work context so we can understand what drives people at work, what motivates them, what engages them, what makes them happy, what ensures that they thrive. And so we've really got this kind of lens, pair of lenses on, if you like, throughout this project. But we also have expertise from Dr. Blythe McLennan, who many of you would recognise Blythe as being an expert in emergency management volunteer strategy, which is important for this project because we're aware we have, well, in fact, the volunteer workforce is larger than the paid workforce in emergency management. It's not just us, though. We're also consulting other Bushfire Natural Hazards CRC researchers. So some of these names may be familiar to you as well. Associate Professor Christopher Behrman from CQU, Dr. Peter Hayes, who I believe is now at RMIT, Dr. Celeste Young, and Dr. Andrew Gissing. Okay, so what is the goal? I've explained to you that the goal was to provide an overview, but what I really want to do is just explain a little bit our process or our thinking. We wanted this to be ultimately an accessible project, and what I mean by that is we want people from different disciplines with different goals to be able to pick up the outputs of this project and understand exactly what the implications are. And so to that end, we've broken the project down into 3 processes. We've started by undertaking a consultation process designed to, I guess, put the boundaries around what this project will include and what it will not include. And that's been guided by a steering committee formed by members of various AFAC groups and other end users. So that we've produced a scoping document from that, which we're happy to share if anybody's interested, but that has been reviewed by the steering committee. And then we break the actual content of the project down into 2 phases. So in phase 1, we're looking at what's changing. So what is the changing landscape between now and 2030? And phase 2 is really focused on understanding what the implications are for volunteers and paid emergency management personnel. So I'll walk you through those two phases. I'll be keeping it fairly high level, and at the end, certainly would be very happy to invite questions and answers, but I've got a couple of questions for this audience as well. So it's, in a way, the Q&A session is really for us to ask you questions and turning things around a little bit. So let's quickly talk about the changing landscape. So again, the goal of this phase of the project is to understand what's changing before we have to understand what's changing before we start thinking about, well, what the implications of those are. We've identified a total of 7 areas through consultation with the steering committee. And you can see those on the slide, hopefully. So first of all, we acknowledge that the manner in which we can complete our work has been changing rapidly, and will probably continue to, that these changes will continue to accelerate. We're finding that we're working increasingly in a more uncertain environment, and we're also finding that, observing that work is becoming increasingly more interconnected. And so to respond to that, we have to think about how we can optimize interactions between people and these systems that are either crunching data, collecting data, or interpreting data. We also observed significant changes to the manner in which we are employed. So you've probably heard of Uber and Uber Eats, and they're probably the most accessible example of this kind of new gig work economy. We're also aware of demographic changes. So for example, we're aware that the population is aging, and in many parts of the country, there seems to be a decline in the number of people living in rural and regional areas. We're also aware that people are moving around a lot more than they used to. The manner in which people volunteer is starting to change as well, or has been changing for a while. So we've noticed a decline in formal volunteering models and increasing in more kind of informal or spontaneous models. This is an area that Blythe is very familiar with. In terms of physical technology, it's hard to escape the reality that we keep inventing really cool things, right? So on the one hand, you've got an aging infrastructure, but on the other hand, there's all kinds of new devices being created. So 3D printing may enable certain things that were not possible before. There's a lot of talk around the advent of autonomous vehicles and what that might mean for the emergency management sector, and wearable technology, which might give us some insight, real-time insights into how people are tracking. There's also what we're kind of distinguishing between the physical technology, the stuff you can pick up and touch, from the digital technology. So which is also changing very rapidly, and so we're starting to see more powerful computing, AI and machine learning algorithms that are kind of designed to make predictions or anticipate behaviours. You know, the advent of 5G networks and what that might mean. We're also starting to see developments in augmented and extended reality, which might have implications for how we train people. Additionally, we've got changes to public policy and societal expectations. So there's just been a big Royal Commission looking into the response to natural disasters. And there'll be a lot of discussion in that document around expectations of the public and what that might imply for policy. There's an increasing level of professionalisation, for example, being observed amongst the volunteer communities, and a fair few inquiries like the Royal Commission and public scrutiny. So what does that mean for the future workforce? And of course, there's changing risks. We're observing the effects of anthropogenic global warming, catastrophic disasters, and so forth. And so when you think about those 7 areas, those 7 different areas in combined, you can sort of form an appreciation for why we have formed such a diverse team and why we're also consulting widely with other experts. So this slide really summarises those areas, and I'm very happy to share that. Sorry, did I hear someone speak then? No, all good. Okay, so for the second phase of this,
may I ask everyone who's online to actually switch off your microphone? You're actually interrupting the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't realise it was online. Thanks for that, Desiree. After collecting and reviewing the literature in these areas and synthesizing those, the second phase for this project is to review the literature, which will inform what the implications are for the future workforce of 2030 in emergency management. And we've identified 8 key areas. Again, these key areas represent the full breadth of the employee and volunteer life cycle, if you like. And they also map directly onto the expertise that we have. So we're in the process of conducting our reviews of the first 4 of these areas, and these include recruitment and selection. And so we're thinking about, in that space, which is an area that that happens to be my area of expertise, we're looking at how, for example, how digital and online technology is changing recruitment and selection practices, and how that might affect the way these practices unfold in the emergency management space. For example, we're seeing now the introduction of really highly immersive assessments of skills. There's also an interest in future skills, understanding what these future skills are. So, and a lot of people in the future skills space, for example, have been talking about understanding how to help people adapt to change quickly, or drive change themselves, as opposed to simply being proficient in their work. And a lot of thought leaders in this space are arguing that these capacities to adapt and drive change are particularly important now, because these days many of our jobs are changing quite rapidly, so it's no longer sufficient just to be proficient. In the socialization and training space, this is an area that Dr. Jane Chong is expert in. So we're looking at what current practice is at the moment, and how that's likely to change. So, for example, we've been looking at how immersive and socialization and training may be adapted to allow people to join, to participate in emergency management from all different areas, rather than having to physically go to the same, for example, a brigade, group, or unit. We're looking at how work can be designed to promote well-being amongst the emergency management workforce. And what sits across all of these areas is how to promote diversity and inclusion in both the volunteer and paid workforces. So look, I promised a high-level summary. Jane and Blythe are both online as well. If you have any specific questions, that they can address those if I'm not able to. I should just say that, again, this is not intended to be a kind of, we don't want this report to be something that just sits on somebody's shelf and doesn't get read. And so with that in mind, we're focusing on very concrete, practical, user-friendly outputs. And examples in consultation with our stakeholder group, our steering committee, have suggested various strategies for achieving this. So things like sort of infographic, one-page, summaries of what's happening and what the implications are. Things like animations, vignettes, workforce 2030 stories. So imagining a case study of a 2030 worker in this environment, given the changes, and of course we will produce a summary report. So that is a summary of the project. Again, happy to share the slides, but also take any questions today. But in particular, because I'm aware we're presenting to Northern Australian audience here, we've identified 3 questions that I would like to ask to you. Of course, you're welcome to answer them in the session now in the next few minutes, but alternatively, you can also get in touch with us via email is probably the best way. You can contact us via the project contact Jane Chong at curtin.edu.au. So that the 3 questions are: what are some of the challenges that are specific to emergency services workforce? Services workforce in Northern Australia, and how might those challenges unfold in the next 10 years? What do you see as opportunities that are specific to the emergency services workforce in Northern Australia? And I think we heard a little bit about some of those just in the previous presentation. And are there any specific research areas that are of particular interest or importance to emergency services workforces in your area that we can focus on? So that ends the presentation part. Thanks very much for listening.
Do you have any questions here in the audience for Patrick or his team?
Hi, Patrick. My name's Andrew Kenyon from Australian Red Cross.
Hi, Andrew.
Okay, yeah. And I think one of the challenges that we face with the emergency services workforce is that our primary disaster season, which is the cyclone season, coincides with people's holidays. And so we have quite a transient non-Indigenous population who heads south exactly when we need them.
Right. So if I interpret that right, that means a huge pool of potential responders disappears right at the critical moment. Thank you for that. We will put that into our we'll add that to our list of challenges.
All right. Has anyone else got any questions? I have a question for you, Patrick. Based on your research, how can you, I mean, practically, what would you say would be the most important thing that you would bring out for the workforce? What would you say something that we would bring out and that would be helpful from a utilization, from a this is what you can do perspective?
What's the one thing, the one single practical thing? I also noticed, just to combine this question with one that's popped up in the chat. John Bates has also asked in the chat, have there been any surprises in the early work you've been doing? And I think that dovetails really well to your question, Desiree. I think the biggest surprise is just how interconnected all of these issues are. And we initially had planned to have this nice little discrete model where there are 7 changing landscape areas and 8 workforce areas. And what we're discovering, even in a conversation we had yesterday, is that it's actually proving to be quite difficult to present a single discrete message as opposed to a fully integrated message. So for example, the way you recruit, the way you might change recruiting practices for say volunteers and paid staff will have implications for the way you onboard them and the way you introduce them into the workforce. It also has implications for the way you might train them and the way you might deploy them in response to different situations. So I mean, I guess with the wisdom of hindsight, perhaps we shouldn't have been too surprised by that, but certainly, you know, the picture is definitely, we're definitely forming this kind of integrated picture rather than a kind of hub and spoke model, which is what we had put in our original proposal.
Okay, all right, thank you. And we're just running on time. So thank you so much for your time, Patrick, and for your team to be on standby to answer questions. If we have any other questions for you at People Stand, we'll be channeling them, and certainly the answers to the questions that you've asked to the audience will be speaking to them, and hopefully we can feed you some of the answers that you require. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye, Patrick. And if you can just stop, you stop sharing, so. Thank you.